Hello, and welcome back to the Onward Shift podcast. Today we're doing something a little bit new, and that's having two incredible people on the podcast at the same time. We've got Katie and Andy, both with different experiences and different knowledge into gambling. Katie, if you could take the mic and do a quick introduction of yourself and the amazing company that you work for, that'd be great. Thank you.
Thanks, Vish, and thanks for having us. Yeah, my name's Katy Wilson. I'm the Training Operations and Partnerships Lead with the UK charity Bet No More. Established back in 2013, our CEO and founder, Frankie Graham, had his own lived experience of gambling harms, and through his recovery, he sort of identified that for him, it's that lived experience that is really crucial to getting really effective support with gambling harms. So he established Bet No More with lived experience really at its very core, with our peer-to-peer services that we provide to people experiencing gambling harms. So my role within the organisation is quite varied, but primarily I focus on our WorkSafe workplace wellbeing initiative. So we travel across the country, attending events to help raise awareness within organisations. We deliver training and lived experience sessions, but all fundamentally at the heart with lived experience underpinning everything that we do. And the main focus is to get organisations and companies on board to recognise that gambling harms, people are gambling at work, and there are people experiencing gambling harms, and that businesses in particular can play a really key role when it comes to the prevention of those harms, but also signposting people towards the brilliant array of support services that are out there. So that's a little bit about us and what we do.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Katie. And Andy, you've got the personal story, the experience you've lived through with gambling. We'd love to know more. We'd love to hear your experience, and if you can share your knowledge, that would be amazing.
So I have got lived experience of gambling harm. Looking back in time, I think that I always had a little bit of that instinct within me in terms of, like, there was a little bit of a flame or a little bit of a fire that was associated probably with risk more than anything. And I grew up in a sort of like a seaside town, fruit machines, things like that, which is often the sort of like the journey into this for a lot of kids, for sure. Got into adult life. Online gambling wasn't a thing at all at that point in time. We're talking. I'm 49 now. We're talking like, I don't know, 39 years ago, roughly, give or take. And I got into going to the betting shops on a Saturday morning with friends. As much as, so hindsight's a wonderful thing, obviously, and we always use hindsight when we're talking about past experiences and things like that. Hindsight's a wonderful thing. I look back on that time now, and I think at that time I didn't think that anything was going badly wrong. I thought that I was just doing, more than anything, I thought I was doing what everyone else was doing. I thought I was behaving in a normal, sort of leisurely, social way, and that gambling was just the thing. For sort of young lads growing up, as going back to some of the awareness raising that Katie's talking about in terms of the work that they do, it's still a thing now. It's more of a thing now, to be fair. So I got into a cycle of going to the betting shop, sometimes on a Saturday, and then eventually it became every Saturday. And then eventually it became not just going with friends on a Saturday, but it would be going Saturday morning traditionally, and then probably going back on a Monday or a Tuesday because there was football on. My thing was betting on the football. So it'd be going back and betting on the football on a Tuesday night, Wednesday night, essentially any night that there was football on, to begin with. As it escalated upwards. As with the frequency of that gambling, the amounts of money that I was spending gradually crept up as well. Again, completely unaware of it at the time. I just thought I was having a nice time, and I didn't really have any financial commitments at that point in time. I lived with parents, didn't have any sort of bills to worry about and stuff like that. So again, going back to the audience for your podcast, Bish, and maybe youngsters that are going into the construction industry and stuff like that, there was an element of, I didn't really care too much about my financial well-being back in that time, because it wasn't relevant to me. As long as I had enough money to go out on a weekend, that was all I needed to sort of bother about too much. But as things went on, and then as online gambling became a thing, and it became like the norm, that if you had a laptop on your desk at work, which is where I sort of started with that sort of side of things more than anything, or a computer at home, or eventually when the iPhone was sort of invented in 2008, I think, from memory. When that smartphone thing came along, that opened up a whole world of carnage for me, because it meant, in the simplest of terms, it meant that I could go from not needing to drive to the betting shop, or not needing to physically go somewhere, to having an instant bookies in my pocket 24/7. And again, talking about the sort of like the audience of this pod, all of those people have got that as well, essentially, nowadays. So things escalated. So online came in, things escalated. I started to risk more money than I could afford. I started to chase losses in amongst all of that process, which anyone that's got a rational head on them will know is a bad thing to do. But I was behaving completely irrationally by that point in time. And I was trying to recoup the money that I'd lost, trying to win my way out of a hole, basically, a financial muddle. For me, everything came to a head for me really when I sat down with my partner at the time. We were basically buying our first house, or trying to buy our first house, and we sat down in the mortgage broker's office, and I literally had to confess there and then that I didn't have any of the money saved up. He essentially said to her, so we know where your deposit is, whatever the amount was, 15, 16 grand or whatever it was. So Andy, we don't quite understand where yours is, because we haven't got details for an ISA, we haven't got details for a deposit account. So just explain where your money is. And I had to come clean at that point. And I literally ended up coming clean and walking out of the office of this guy in the local town that I was in, and more or less throwing up outside the office. I was physically ill from it at that point. Trying to whistle through this a little bit, Fish, because I know we've got loads and loads to talk about. That was quite a while back. That was in 2007. So you're talking 18 years ago, there or thereabouts. What happened at that point in time is everything came out at home. Everything came out with my partner. Everything came out eventually within a day or two with my parents. And we sat down as a family, and one way or another, my mum and dad decided that they thought they could help me. And I'm grateful for the help that they tried to help me with at that point in time. But I also know that it was, looking back at knowing what I now know about addiction, looking back at it, I know that it was very much the wrong thing to do. So they essentially said to me and my partner, sat down in the living room at home or whatever, and said, look, if you're willing to give this idiot a second chance here, then we've got some money saved up. We'll sort out the deposit, and we'll figure this out as we go forward.
Oh.
And as someone who's been addicted to gambling will relate to, if anyone's listening, that is always like a golden ticket. That's like a free like pass back into life. That was like, well, all of these problems are gone away now, and I can just go ahead and live my life. When I tell this story, Fish and Katie, the other thing that I always say is that at that point in time, there was so much, things are improving gradually now. But back then there was so much stigma and shame attached to gambling, very much different to drugs or alcohol and stuff like that, because for whatever reason, people just tried to hide behind it. And all of that shame and stigma at that point in time meant that we didn't talk to anyone about it. I didn't talk to anyone about it. I didn't even attempt to try and get any support. Again, different times back then, there was probably only GA available. But I could have sought out a GA meeting, a Gambling Anonymous meeting, but I didn't want to. All I wanted to do was try and forget about what had happened and move forward with life onwards from that. There or thereabouts, that is what I did at that point in time. So we moved forward. We bought the house that we were planning on buying, had 2 children in amongst that period of time thereafter. My daughter was born in 2008. My son was born in 2000. And I was very much abstinent from gambling at that point in time. No even thoughts about it. Not even buying a lottery ticket, but it was all purely on willpower, nothing more than that. I hadn't gotten any support, I hadn't tried to do anything about it. And it's probably no surprise that eventually that willpower ran out. And in 2014, relapsed at that point in time, for no reason at all, really. If I look back on it now and try and say what happened or what caused it, The God's honest truth is I don't really know. I've got suspicions around that time where I was busy with work and stressed and going through various things, and also like a young parent as well, or youngish parent, should I say? I was probably in the 30s or whatever. But you start, and we'll get onto relationships and stuff in amongst this later on. But you start bringing other people and other things into your life, and it, to a certain extent, it makes it more complicated. And sometimes you want to escape from that complication and try and do something else. And so in 2015, I relapsed. Again, anyone that's listening will recognise the fact that if you relapse from anything, whether it's gambling, drugs, alcohol, whatever it might be, you're not likely to relapse at going back at £10 on a Saturday morning. You're gonna go back in where you finished off, and that's what I did. Went back in at spending silly amounts of money very quickly, got myself into problems from a money point of view. Didn't know what to do, because I knew that if my family found out, that it would be essentially curtains on everything. My relationship would be done at that point in time, because we gave you a second chance and you've blown it. So I didn't know what to do. So and again, this is just like people talk about the gambler's fallacy, or the mind of a gambler. The only thing that I thought that I could possibly do was to try and win my way out of trouble. And through the autumn of 2014, I basically burned my way through all of the money that we'd saved up, all the money that I'd managed to sort of build up over the period of recovery. Got to the time of February 15. I'd spent all of that. I'd taken out credit cards again. Not the first time that I'd done it. I'd taken out credit cards that I was trying to use to fund that habit and try and win my way out of a situation. And eventually I ran out of money, and no one was going to lend me any money at that point in time. It was a done deal. But my mindset was, and again, I'm not proud of any of this. It's just me telling the story of what happened. My mindset at that point in time was, I've got to keep on going. I've got to carry on. Somehow I've got to try and get this back. I effectively knew that so some of the money that I'd spent was in a couple of savings accounts in my kids' names. And I knew that when the annual statement came through the door, and my partner at the time picked up the post, if I hadn't gone home specially to try and grab the post, which was a regular thing for me, but I knew that if she got hold of that letter, the whole world would fall apart. And in May 15, that's exactly what happened. And I got a phone call, and she essentially said, "Where's the kids' money?" And I've never mentioned that before on a pod or anything like that. But she said to me, "Where's the money?" It was 40 grand. And I'd gradually bled that dry over the autumn, roughly £1,000 a week, or maybe £2,000 a week. Bled it dry, just trying to find my way out of that hole. A couple of months prior to that situation occurring, as I said, I'd run out of money, and I didn't know what to do. So I had a decent job. I had a company credit card, and my solution at that point in time was use your company credit card, get some cash out of the hole in the wall. We could draw out on the cards that we had. We could take 500 quid at a time out. I had a hefty credit limit on that card as well. And I thought, well, I'll take 500 quid out, and maybe I can just turn it into a grand or £2,000 or whatever it might be on a Friday afternoon or evening. And then maybe I can turn that into enough to put the money back in the savings account, so that everyone is none the wiser. And I'll try and sort of cover it over one way or another. Again, it goes without saying that, again, talking about the willpower not lasting and all that sort of stuff, it goes without saying that was just a false hope. That was never going to happen. And that started me on a very slippery slope at that point in time, where I consistently and regularly stole money from work, tried to win my way out of my problems that I'd gotten into. And essentially that went on for best part of about 4.5 years. Cutting a long story short, because I know we're pushed for time, but cutting that long story short, I eventually got caught through various things that were going on at work in the summer of 2019. In the period before that, I'd gone through a completely chaotic lifestyle of gambling, not sleeping, starting a gambling session at about 5 a.m. on a Saturday and finishing it on a Sunday afternoon with limited sleep in the middle, because this, for whatever reason, this addiction takes more from you than any other addiction that I've ever known. If you talk about, so I mentioned like drugs and drink and stuff like that. If you talk about drink and drugs, there's only so much lager you can drink. There's only so much cocaine you can put up your nose or whatever before you end up being physically ill, fall over, collapse on the floor, whatever it might be. The difference with gambling is that you ain't going to stop until the money's done. Simple as that. Until all of the money's gone, you ain't going to stop. And even if you win something, you're still going to carry on. You're going to spend, even if you win, making a number up. If you win $5,000 on a Saturday afternoon, you're going to spend it on a Sunday. Once you're fully addicted, that's all going to go, no matter what. And that's where I got to with it. And I look back on it now, and it's like, geez, it's hideous. The stuff that I did, the behaviour that I had, the stuff that I put my family through, the lies, the deceit, and all of that sort of stuff, absolutely horrific. But yeah, not a good time in my life for sure. Like I say, got to 2019, got caught. Still didn't want to own up to what had happened. I was still in denial at that point. I owned up to. We try not to get into money, sort of money conversations and things like this, but to a certain extent, I have to for the way that the story works out. I owned up to like 70 grand's worth of fraud at that point in time and theft. I knew it was a enormous amount more than that. I didn't really know what it was, but I knew it was miles more than that. When the police eventually came to my home on a Saturday evening in June 2020, police knocked on the door. I was cooking dinner for the family. My partner answered the door. She came through the kitchen, white as a sheet, and said, "The police are here and they want to talk to you." And at that point in time, again, God's honest truth, there was nothing at all that they could possibly have been coming to talk to me about apart from the thing that they were there for. I'd gone through, if not years prior to that, of hallucinating blue flashing lights coming down the drive, 5 o'clock in the morning or 4 o'clock in the morning, thinking, yeah, they're here now, because you hear stories of where they'll raid a person's house in the early hours of the morning and stuff like that. And I went through a whole period of that and being wide awake and not knowing what's going on and stuff like that. But eventually they turned up on a Saturday night and had a very civilized chat. They basically came in and said, "Look, we're investigating a fraud at a place that you used to work at. We believe that you're involved. And if you're up for doing so, we'd like you to come and do an interview with us." At that point in time, I knew that was a done deal. I knew the game was up, if you called it that. So I went up and did an interview with them. They let me go at the end of that. I went home. I lived probably 6 months on from that in a pretty much reclusive state. You have to bear in mind that this was all during the sort of like the world of COVID as well. So we were all locked up a little bit anyway, and locked down and stuff. So I went through a period of time of just sort of regressing in life and withdrawing from social circles and stuff like that as well. And then eventually in November of 2020, the same lady from the police that had interviewed me previously came round to the house on a weekday lunchtime. I was literally in the kitchen just making my lunch. I was working from home at that point in time. I was literally in the kitchen making some lunch. I saw her walk across the drive and I thought, yeah, today's the day. And at that point in time, she handed me my charge papers, my court summons. And that created a situation, that sort of started off a situation whereby I went through the criminal justice system. And I went to court in the spring of 2021. And then in the June of 2021, I then received a 4-year sentence for fraud, essentially for stealing £1.3 million to fund my gambling addiction. And that started off a chain of events for me in terms of never been to prison at that point in time. I was probably mid-40s-year-old fella, never been in trouble, getting on a prison van, a sweatbox, going off to jail, not having a clue what was going on, and equally not having a clue what the future looked like. So it all sounds doom and gloom at the minute, but this is just a process that I had to go through to recognise what I'd done and what had happened. So I went into prison, really struggled. Can't even begin to say how much I really struggled. Not in the way that you might think from like being bullied or whatever, that sort of stuff. Prison for me wasn't anything like that. I felt quite safe whilst I was inside. But the thing that really, really affected me was the whole mental health aspect of it. So the back at that point in time, and I think in some places it's still the same. So it was basically 23 hours locked up a day. So 23 hour bang up, locked up for endless hours with basically nothing to do. So when you've got when you've got a mind that's very, or a brain that's very active, very alive, that's been processing all of these things for all of this period of time, whether it's the gambling or the aftermath or the, how do I steal more money to fund it, whatever it might be. And then you end up shutting all of that brain down or trying to shut it down, and you're sat there thinking, I can't do anything. I'm stuck here, and I'm kind of like out on a limb, and I don't know what to do. And that was kind of what it was like for me for quite a good while in amongst that period of time. Gradually, things improved. So one of the things that I should have said is that just before I went into jail, I recognised and realised that my mistakes of past years, when I hadn't sought out any support, I needed to do something differently. So I started to connect with people. I started to research stuff. I started to look people up. I started to get in touch with people and started to open up about what had gone on. To be fair, I didn't open up about it until it was out in the press. And that's just me being very honest about it. It took for a local newspaper to cover my story before I was prepared to speak out and chat to people about it. But gradually I got my head around it. Gradually I started to talk to people, and gradually one way or another, even though I was going into prison, one way or another I started to get better. And I went into prison with the mindset of, this is going to be horrific. The day that I went in, I can't even begin to describe what it was like. The day that I went to the prison, saying goodbye to my kids, the morning of being sentenced, I knew I was going away at that point in time. My son was 8 and my daughter was 10 at that point in time. And I knew that I wasn't coming home that day. It was going to be like, and it was just horrendous. And don't get me wrong, I knew that I had to go to prison, and I knew what I'd done, and I knew that I was the person responsible for it. I was the person that had taken all the money. I was the person that had lied and cheated throughout my relationships at work and so on and so forth. And I knew that was the outcome, but it didn't mean that I enjoyed it. It was something I had to accept. So went into jail with the mindset to a certain extent that gradually things might get better, but also after not too long of being there, essentially thinking, like when you get like a short, sharp shock moment when it's like, wow, is this actually real? And after about 2 or 3 weeks of being in prison, I got that moment. And I literally sat there on the bed in jail. I was probably sharing with someone at that point in time, but he must have been somewhere else doing something. I was literally just sat there, and I was like, "What are you going to do here? You thought you'd screwed up to a certain extent, and you thought things were bad, but this is like really bad. What does life look like going forward? Who's going to give you a job in the future? How are you going to support anyone? How are you going to support yourself, let alone anyone else?" And there were some really tough times mentally there. Given this is a mental health sort of podcast and talking about sort of that side of things, I ended up having to reach out to whoever I could reach out to. I'd phone people when I knew they might not be able to answer because they were at work. I'd write to people continually because it was a way of trying to sort of busy my time up and keep myself occupied. And one of the things I ended up sort of convincing myself of. So I had some bad days in there. I convinced myself that no matter how good or bad a day I was having, they only ever lasted 24 hours, no matter what. The day was 24 hours, and that was a done deal. And then you moved on to the next one. And I lived by that then, and I still live by it now to a certain extent. Prison weren't a fun time. Gradually, I got moved to an open prison. As I got moved on to an open prison, things improved at that point. You're still in prison. You've still got rules and regulations to live by, but things improved. And I suppose in amongst that, it's probably worth talking about employment and Vish as well. So I work in the world of construction nowadays. I didn't back then.
When all of this was happening, what was going on with relationships at home? Wife, children, parents? What was going on there?
So to begin with, I was just trying to cover it all up and trying to pretend that it wasn't happening. And eventually all of that became very robotic, I guess is the best way of putting it. It was a case of going through the motions. And like if you're in denial of stuff that's not good, it was sort of like, we know this is happening, but we don't really want to talk about it. We just want to like try and get on kind of thing. And it was to a certain extent, it was like that. I mean, other relationships, sort of wider relationships. So as much as it pains me to say it, my mum and dad didn't find out about me going to prison until the day that I went to the magistrates' court. So that wasn't when I went to prison, but my first day in magistrates' court, which was 1st of July to January, I think it was, or 20th of January 2021. The local newspaper covered the story the day after. I hadn't told them anything about it. I had to race round to their house at lunchtime, sit them down in their conservatory and basically say, look, this has happened. You're going to find out about this now because it's in the newspaper. Did it break all of those relationships? Not necessarily. Did it harm them? Definitely. Are we in the process of rebuilding all of those? For sure. Not necessarily all of them. So one of the things that happened off the back of that was I sort of split up with my partner that I'd been with for 20 years, give or take. And that was, I think, we reached a point there where that just couldn't be fixed. And you just have to accept that and sort of move on as well. But yeah, so we always talk, when Katie was talking at the start there, talking about affected others and other people and all of the collateral damage that's done through gambling harm. And there's so much of it. It's not just all about the person that has lost all of their money. And in many cases, no one's stolen any money. They've just lost what they had. I often think if I'd have had a job like in a shop or a garage or something like that, I would have just been dipping in the till. I'd have spent whatever I could get my hands on, but I wouldn't have been able to steal what I did steal to fund it. So there's a lot of relationship damage done in amongst that. Going back to the open prison, time moved on.
I just want to quickly ask Katie a question, if that's all right. Thank you. Katie, with all the work that you do, is everything up to now, the trauma, the pain of it all, is these stories that are familiar to you? Because this is completely shocking to me, as in, I've had issues with gambling in my life as well, and I'll be open and vulnerable about that. I used to work in maintenance, and 2 doors down there was a William Hill. I was young. I was about 18, 19 years old, and what I would do is I'd spend half my paycheck, which was like anywhere between £900 to £1,100 in William Hill in a month, easily. And I can completely relate with you, Andy, when you say you lose, and then you lose again, and at some stage you keep losing, and you go, I can win this back. And it's all this positivity that comes out of you. I can do this. I'm not a loser. I'm not a failure. I can do this. And it's those bits which are, gosh, you really do have to have some willpower to go over it. But Katie, have you heard these stories? And, where do you stand with this?
I mean, firstly, obviously, just huge thank you to Andy for sharing what you've shared with us so far. And I know it can't be easy to sort of be that vulnerable, so I really appreciate it. And I wish I could say that I hadn't heard this kind of story before, but regrettably I have. Similar to you, Vish, before I joined Bet No More, as I said at the start, I didn't understand anything about gambling addiction. I used to see the adverts, when the fun stop. Again, don't get me started on that one. But you just think that I couldn't understand, I couldn't have any sort of perception as to how people could just continue doing something that they couldn't afford to realistically do. As Andy pointed out, when it comes to drugs and alcohol, your body reaches a saturation point almost, where it can't physically take on any more. But with gambling, you just need access, you need time, and you need resources. And once you've got all those things, then you can still continue to gamble. And the problem is with people that are in the depths of addiction, they will find those things. They will find access. So if they've got a work phone, they will put their the gambling apps on that phone. If they blocked from the work phone, they'll put it on their personal phone, and they'll take that phone to work with them. If they're at work and they just need some time to gamble, they'll have 2 screens, and they'll be the gambling will be on one screen, and their work will be on the next screen. We hear some stories of people that are gambling whilst they're at work, but they're doing high-risk jobs in the construction industry, operating heavy machinery, driving heavy goods vehicles and things like that. And the minute you say that they're gambling whilst they're at work, that there's a health and safety implication there as well, not just the well-being side of things. And then obviously, as Andy's story really highlights, when the money runs out, when you're in the depths of addiction, you will find the money. And unfortunately, that does lead to people borrowing initially, potentially then the theft and so on. And that's when, the impact on the affected others starts to really come to light as well. So yeah, sadly, these are not stories that I'm unfamiliar with, but every time I hear them, it's still, as I
Takes you
say,
back. Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to say, you beat me to it, but Andy, wow, to share that much vulnerability and honesty takes so much courage. So thank you so much. And I know we haven't come to the finish of your story, but I really wanted to ask some questions around up to this stage because I could get lost in your story so easily. But I guess I've actually written some statistics down here. And Kay, this is something that you just touched on, and Andy, you've touched on it as well. I believe in 2016, a survey was carried out for the construction industry, and that survey basically said 10% of the industry is affected by gambling. Now, that was in 2016. That's 9 years ago. And technology wasn't that great then. Now, we've got apps, we've got online betting, we've got so many more easily accessible places to gamble. I highly doubt that 10% is the only amount the industry is affected. So, what's your thoughts with that? And how can we, like anyone listening to this right now, how can we kind of give them any education around this and go, how can we just get them to stop? I know that's crazy to think you can just tell someone to stop. I know that's not exactly how it works, but you two are so experienced in this. What advice would you give that person listening and is scared to even tell anyone because it's such a scary topic?
I'll let Andy cover that as well. But from my point of view, what we're doing here is crucial to that. It's that awareness raising that has to come first. You've said yourself, Vish, you've had personal experience of gambling and losing half your pay packet in the blink of an eye. But even you're sort of surprised at the story that Andy's shown, that Andy shared with us today. And so you're not going to be the only one when this goes out and other people listen to it, they're also going to be surprised, but they will know someone. You can guarantee they will know someone who has experienced gambling at a harmful level. But that awareness raising is just absolutely crucial. The more people we can reach, the better, because on the back of everything that we talk about, every discussion that we have with anybody, we always talk about the support services. We talk about the fact that those support services, just as the gambling apps are available 24/7, so is access to some form of support. There is always a helpline that you can call. There is always a referral form that you can complete. There is always literature that you can read online. And there's always blocking software that you can access 24/7 to install on your phone to prevent you from gambling any further. So there, as I said, awareness raising and training. We talk about the importance of training because once the awareness has been raised within an organisation in particular, then obviously there is the greater chance of someone coming forward to disclose, whether that's to a mental health first aider, whether that's to HR, or even just a line manager or project manager who has that trusted sort of one-to-one relationship. So if someone is going to come to you to disclose, there is no point them doing that if you don't know where to send them for support or you don't know how to have those conversations with them. So that's where we say that the crucial aspect of it is once that awareness raising is done, educate the right people, educate the people that are going to be potentially having those conversations, and really share that information and knowledge about what support services are out there.
Andy, I've got a question for you.
Go ahead.
From everything what Katie said, I know I'd be petrified, terrified. Speaking to someone in a company about this addiction, it's just too scary. It's just too scary. I'm going to lose my job. I'm gonna have to come clean to people. It's just petrifying. Where do you stand with that?
Where do I stand with that? The reality of that is, I think you're completely wrong. That it's that you're going to lose your job and it's going to end up in a state of a situation where you're out of work because you've got an addiction to gambling. That's just not going to happen. In 99% of workplaces, that ain't going to happen. Is my honest view of it nowadays, because I think the work that the likes of Katy with Bet No More are doing, and across the whole sort of scope of that gambling awareness raising work that's happening all across the country, I think gradually people are starting to open their eyes up and say, do you know what, this is actually a thing. This can be an illness. So one thing that I'd say as well, Vish, is, and I always try and say this on any kind of podcast or any kind of discussion that I have about gambling harm, it doesn't affect everyone. It's the simple truth of it. Not everyone's going to get addicted to gambling. Not every person that's working in construction today that happens to listen to this podcast is going to end up a gambling addict. Terminology sometimes people don't like, but I don't really give a damn about the terminology. I was an addict, full stop, done. Not everyone's going to turn into that. Some people are just going to have a few quid on the football on a weekend and just enjoy it in the same way that, if you compare it to an alcoholic or something like that, an alcoholic can't go into a pub and have a pint or a couple of pints or whatever, because they're not going to stop until they've keeled over, kind of thing. And gambling's the same. It affects different people in different ways, and it just so happens that in my case it affected me in the way that it did. I'm quite interested nowadays I'm only getting into the early days of sort of reading about it, but I'm quite interested in the whole sort of neurodiversity and stuff like that, and how that has got some kind of maybe a more addictive sort of tendencies going on there. People that live in, or people have got that sort of background, sort of like the ADHD and all of that sort of stuff. I think there's something to learn from that for sure. But not everyone that has a bet on a Saturday afternoon is going to then go back on a Sunday and do it again, and then Monday, and so on and so forth. But your statistic that you mentioned there, the 10% or whatever, I try not to get caught up in statistics at all, because different people use different versions of them, and it always ends up in a bit of a bun fight and a bit of an argument. But I'd say 10% is underballed. Personally, experience of working in the construction industry in the last couple of years and listening to conversations in coffee rooms or in meeting rooms while we're waiting to start a discussion or whatever it might be, there's more than 10% of people that are actually getting involved in gambling, for sure. A lot more. And the more that get involved, as much as I said, not everyone ends up experiencing harm from gambling, but the more that get involved in it, the more harm there will be, for sure. And that's the whole point in taking part in things like this evening, and trying to express all of that vulnerability that is within. Again, going back to construction, especially in construction where you've got to a certain extent, without being sexist, you've got like a macho environment where there's like peer pressure and people are working away a lot of the time. I've been out on the travels in the last year or two, and you've got people that live in Scotland that are working down on the south coast for weeks on end, and they haven't really got too much to do with the time. Whilst they're working away like that, they've got, what can they do in an evening? They're going to go to the pub, they're going to watch the football or the racing, and they're probably going to get, one way or another, encouraged to have a bet on it. It doesn't mean that that's going to become harmful, but it could do if we don't have conversations like this and try and say, do you know what, guys, just try and keep a lid on it. Just try and take it steady, try and take it slow. I'd never ever say to someone, I'm going off on a bit of a rant here, I appreciate that, but right. I'd never ever say to someone, even after all of the stuff that I've done, all the stuff that I've been through, I'd never say to someone, do you know what, you shouldn't be having a bet. Don't do that. It's gonna cause you grief. I wouldn't do that. All I'd do is I'd try and say, look, by all means, have a bit of fun, enjoy yourself, try and win a tenner or whatever it might be. But whilst you're doing that, just don't forget about the story that I've just told you. Because it can go completely and utterly pear-shaped if you take the eye off the ball and you've got access to money that can create, the financial hangover from gambling is far different to the hangover that you get on a Sunday morning when you've had a night out on the booze. It just, in my case, it lasts forever. It'll never go away. I've got debt with the court and debt with other people and stuff like that, and I'm not in a situation where I'll ever be able to pay it off, and it'll just stay with me basically until I die. As grim as that might sound, but it's the reality of it, and that is very different to drugs and alcohol. Very, very different. So all I'd try and say is to people is just to just keep an eye on it, and also keep an eye on your friends. If you're working in a crew away or whatever, if someone's talking about having a bet on a Wednesday night on the football and it's maybe a tenner, just have a little bit of a thought in the back of your head as to whether maybe it's 50 quid or 100 quid. And watch the reactions whilst they're watching the match in the pub or whatever it might be, or wherever it is, and have curious conversations around that, and try and politely, not getting into someone's privacy area and trying to sort of interrogate someone, but curiously try and figure out what might be going on. and try and get them to think about it themselves. Yeah, anyway, I've ranted a little bit there. I didn't mean to, but it's just how I am sometimes.
No, I mean, if it's all right, I just wanted to circle back to your original question there, Bish, was about that concern about people coming forward within organisations. And obviously Andy's response, to a degree, I don't disagree with what Andy said there, that the likelihood of you being fired from your job isn't as high as people would think. But do you know what? That fear of professional repercussions is one of the major barriers to people coming forward. So, yeah, there may not... And I think it probably also depends to a large degree what kind of role you're employed in as to whether those professional repercussions are founded or unfounded. With people who we've noticed statistically that there is a high risk of people in the legal profession, for example, who won't come forward because the role that they're performing, they're in a role where they're trusted by the firm, they're trusted by the clients, and any shadow of controversy around that, then it damages the reputation of the organisation, and also potentially then you could potentially lose your job. So whilst what Andy says to a degree is correct, I think fundamentally one of the other things of the work that we're doing in Bet No More, but also in other charities across the country, is encouraging organisations to have a gambling policy in place. The minute you do that, you're creating like a psychologically safe space in which people can come forward to disclose, knowing that fear of professional repercussions has been taken away. So that's one of the things that I would say as well.
That's a really, really interesting point. And I don't think either of you are wrong. I think that's the beauty of these conversations. It's we all can just reflect and learn from it. And I think I've never thought of that actually, a gambling policy. I've never heard of one. I've never signed a bit of paperwork on one. You know, when you get your terms of employment, never seen it in a contract. But you're absolutely right. Yeah, I love that idea. And this decade, I know this is going to wind you right up, so I'm just going to throw it out there. So I read online that a university carried out a study on opening game for football for the Premier League.
Yeah.
And the number of gambling adverts that were seen on this football game, it made me think, what the hell? And their number was just over 29,000.
Yeah, I'm familiar with this statistic. It's one I roll out on a regular basis for anyone that starts a conversation around gambling advertising. Yeah, that's the research that was carried out at the start of the Premiership season last year, I think it was.
So I'm going to interject just briefly.
Please.
An interesting follow-on statistic from that is if you went back to the study the year before, it was about a third of that.
Yeah.
So it went from like 10 or something. I'm talking like from memory, but it went from like 10 or something thousand within a year. I saw, and another thing that I saw today as well, and I do rant about these things sometimes. Another thing I saw today was so I live not too far from Norwich, and I saw today that Norwich have just agreed a deal with a betting company. I can't remember the name of them, but it wasn't for the front of their shirt. It's now for the back of their shorts, because within a year or two they won't be allowed to have stuff on the front of their shirt. Premier League at least. Norwich obviously aren't Premier League, but they're going to have a betting sponsor literally on the arse end of the shorts.
Yeah, that says enough. No words.
What does that mean exactly?
Yeah, and you're right. Obviously, they have started to make changes. So advertising gambling companies on the front of shirts is being gradually sort of pedaled back. They are still allowed to advertise on the sleeves, I think, but on the butt end of a footballer, that's a really interesting one. You learn something new every day. But yeah, like close to 30,000 gambling product placement adverts were seen during that weekend. And obviously my mind straight away goes to the fact that kids are watching it.
Yeah.
Kids are watching football all the time. They're engaging in football when they're playing FIFA and stuff like that. They're then watching the football with their friends, with their families and things like that. And gambling is normalised for them. It's completely normalised behaviour. We're opening a massive can of worms in that regard. I'm going to carry on my rant a little bit more on advertising rather than just focusing on the sports betting side and the sports side of things.
Please do.
Bingo, for me, is one of the big ones. If you're I don't watch it because obviously I'm a bit busy, but there was daytime TV programs and things like that are primarily, again, don't want to sound sexist, but they're primarily targeted at women. So your programs like Your Loose Women and things like that. The adverts in between those will be for bingo companies.
Really?
They are targeting women and their need for community and women like to have those connections. Again, generalizing, but it is generally true, and that's what the adverts are tapping into, the sort of the psychology of women who gamble. And the gambling around that, or the advertising around that, is insidious, and it's very targeted.
So that just off the back of that, I actually read another number, and this number was also just as scary, and that was more than 1 million ads per year are published on free TV, and that was in 2024. And you think to yourself, wow, that's 1 million adverts. It's just, I can understand why that is. The bingo makes sense, the adverts make sense. It just blows my mind. Andy, I want to come back to you because I've been left on a bit of a cliffhanger here. I want to know where your story ends. You've come out of prison. Where are you now, and what happened as you came out?
Okay, so we got to the point where I mentioned I was like proper struggling and all that sort of stuff. I got moved to an open prison, and whilst I was at that open prison, one of the conditions there was that you had to try and get work. So if anyone that doesn't understand what an open prison is, it's still a prison, but there are different rules and regulations. So one of the things that you can do eventually, once you've been security cleared, is you can go out and work in the local community and stuff like that. Whilst I was there, Kia, who I work for now, Kia Group, came into the prison that I was serving at. They did a bit of an open day, like a careers kind of day. Very much by luck, they got hold of my information and my sort of CV and stuff like that. And they, the simplest way that I can put it is they had a role that was available in the outside world. So they would have offered that to anyone if they'd applied for it. I applied for it in the same way that anyone else would have done in normal sort of civilian life. And I was fortunate enough to get offered a job with them in April 22, I think it was, something like that. So I started work with Kia in April 22. Sort of had to retrain to a certain extent as a quantity surveyor. Still sort of like a head for numbers and all that sort of stuff that I used to have, but just a different way of trying to apply that whatever you call it, sort of past career skills and stuff. So I started work for them. I got released in June 23. I was already in what I'd see as quite a sustained period of recovery by then. And I came back out into the real world, so to speak. The real world that I came back out into was very much not the real world that I went into prison from. So as I mentioned earlier, one of the casualties of my behaviour and my conviction was that my relationship fell apart. I don't normally talk about stuff like that on things like this, but for whatever reason, I'm okay with that today. So that we went our separate ways. I thought for pretty much all of my time in prison that I'd end up like moving back in with my partner and my kids and so on and so forth. And about 2 months before I was getting out, we had a conversation which basically meant I wasn't. And I had to try and figure out what to do. So again, what did I do? I moved back in with mum and dad for a bit. It might sound, and for anyone listening, moving back in with your parents at the age of 45, 46, whatever it was at the time, probably sounds horrific, but it was the only option realistically at that point in time. And so I moved back in with them for a bit. Kept on working on myself. Kept on trying to do all of the things that I still try and do now. So I've built up, through lots of support, through charities similar to Bet No More, I've gradually figured out what works for me in terms of looking after myself and keeping myself, in my dad's words, keeping myself straight and doing the right things. So I lived with them for a little bit, and then in the autumn of that year, I got a flat that I rent now. I live on my own. That is okay. One of the things. So talking about recovery and things like that. One of the things that, and it's only really come to light to me in the last week or two thinking about this, which is why I'm mentioning it tonight. One of the things that I've realised is that I subconsciously, one way or the other, I decided that I needed to simplify my life when I got out. So I needed to take away as much noise as possible and just concentrate on the things that suited me the best or that served me the best. So do a decent day's work, get some exercise, get some proper rest, eat well. Don't try and complicate things with anything that might affect you mentally, I guess, as the point. So try and just, if you're in the early stages of that sort of recovery piece, try and try and just focus on yourself. There will be other people around you for sure. Whether it might be partners, wives, whatever. I've got 2 teenage children. Without going into detail, a parent of teenage children can be a bit of a challenge sometimes. That's just the life of it. But you have to, or sorry, not you have to. I had to try and find a safe space or a safe distance where I could crawl back to. Is not the right word when I refer to my flat, but somewhere that I could revert back to and just be like, sit with myself and just be me for a little bit, and that has helped me a lot in terms of that whole rebuild process. And like I say, just trying to focus on the right stuff. Even like this morning, I went out for a walk at like 6:45 this morning because I know it does me good. I had quite the last day or two, I've had quite a cluttered head, is the way I'd describe it, and I've had things going on that are outside of my control. Again, when you're in that whole recovery space, you have to realise that there are certain things that you can control and there are certain things that you can't. And the one thing that you can control is the path that you're trying to, move yourself along. And there's no one size fits all either. What works for me might not work for another person. You have to figure it out as you go along, and you will, whilst you're figuring it out, you will take some wrong turns in amongst it. You'll make some decisions that you look back on later and sort of like say to yourself, what did I do that for? That didn't really help me out too much there. But you gradually find your path. But more than anything, for me nowadays, more than anything is I know there or thereabouts, I know the things that will help to look after me. And I know that if I look after me, then the other people that are around me that are important to me, i.e. my kids, family and so on and so forth, and then, other relationships that gradually form as you go along. I know that if I'm looking after me, then I'm in a better place to look after them as well.
Mm.
And if I choose not to do that, then things are probably going to go a little bit bad pretty quickly. So that's my take on the way forward. At least I was a really bad person, but for whatever reason, the stuff that I did when I was really, really struggling, I massively, massively regret, and I'll regret that forever. The damage that was caused, I'll regret forever. But nowadays, I'm trying as best as I possibly can to do what I'd see as being the right stuff. And taking part in this evening, that's bang on with that. Taking part in this evening, if there's one person that listens to this and says, do you know what, I'm having a bit of an issue here, or my friend might be, my dad might be, my brother might be, whatever it might be. If it just creates a little bit of a thought in someone's head and they address it, and then hopefully in the comments and the show notes afterwards, you'll put some signposting and stuff as well, Vish.
Absolutely, 100%.
And then they try and seek some support from that. Then, to a certain extent, we've done our job. We've exposed all of I've probably been more vulnerable than I've been for a long while, I'll put it that way, in terms of what I've spoken about. But you stick it all out there, and then you hope that someone listens to it.
Thank you so much, Andy. Honestly, I've got so many questions, but I just want to start by saying thank you so much. It's not easy to admit all of this and speak about it and take so much accountability. It's, just huge credit to you. So thank you so much. Katie, I had a question for you off the back of something Andy actually mentioned, and that was neurodiversity. I struggle with ADHD and OCD, and gambling for the neurodiverse sounds like research I haven't actually heard much about. Is there any insights you have on that?
It's one of those areas where it is at the moment under researched, but there is definitely a direction of travel towards learning more about that, because there is an inherent risk with people. I've mentioned the word risk there straight away. People who do have neurodiversity or neurodivergence, they are more susceptible to risk-taking behaviours. One of the things with people sometimes who are neurodiverse, a lot of them spend a lot of their time online. That's where they find my child's ADHD and autistic, and they found their people online. And when you put them immersed in this online world, they don't necessarily identify the risks that are out there being presented to them on a daily basis in the same way that someone who's neurotypical might do. So yeah, there are absolutely inherent risks there that we need to be very much aware of, but also there is an urgent need for more research in that area so that we can clarify that. Obviously, we've talked about the advertising, and there are certain ways that the advertising actually is creating a heightened risk for people with neurodiversity. and blurs the lines between gaming and gambling as well. So yeah, there's an awful lot around that still really does need to be a lot of awareness raised around it.
Where would you like to see the research go with, like, where would you like to see things go to improve gambling addiction? Like, what's next? Obviously, we spoke about awareness, but what comes after awareness?
Yeah. So obviously, Andy's already sort of mentioned the fact that relying heavily on data can be problematic for various reasons. I'm very much a proponent of the lived experience. The personal insights and personal experiences, I think, are incredibly powerful. But obviously, on the back of any kind of awareness raising, education, as we've said already, is absolutely crucial. From my point of view, just because, as I mentioned already, the work that I do for Bet No More is very much focused on our workplace wellbeing initiative. The most robust research in workplaces in terms of what sort of industries are particularly at risk and what kind of levels of gambling participation are involved in each industry sector. There hasn't been anything particularly robust since about 2016 when a report came out from Region Partnership, I think it was. So I would love to see more research done in specific industry sectors where we know that there's the fear of professional repercussions, where we know that there's a heightened health and safety elements where people are gambling at work in the construction industry, for example, as we've already mentioned. So for me, much more robust industry specific and work related research is absolutely crucial for the work that we do, so that we know we can then reach out to these organisations and say, look, put a policy in place, raise awareness, and then educate people to signpost to support. So that's my sort of take on it.
Another question for you. Sorry, I'm reeling them off now. You mentioned bingo is quite prominent for females. What about for men? Is there any? Is sports more prominent for gambling with men?
Yeah, there was some recent data actually from the Gambling Commission, I think it was, that showed, they were looking at a sort of a split of men to women gambling on certain activities, and bingo was one of the very few that it was almost exclusively women, not almost exclusive, but it was really such many more women were participating in that, and sports betting was very much more men. We had a session about it last week that I wasn't participating in, so I'm not familiar with all the exact figures, but yeah, there is a divide definitely in terms of what sort of activities people do participate in.
If you're talking about online bingo, they're going to target the advertising in the, as you said earlier, I think in the sort of the morning school run times and all of that sort of stuff. You're unlikely to get lads that are working out as electricians or carpenters or whatever. They're probably not going to see that, but they are going to see the Bet365 in the evening, and they're probably going to react to that more so. So it comes down to the audience that people are looking for. But again, you're talking about businesses that are trying to attract customers, but it's doing it in the right way, and it's then safeguarding those customers in the right way as well, which is where I personally think there's a lot of work to be done.
And what would you like to see the next steps be for that to actually, from your lived experience, what do you think could have, I don't know, set an alarm bell going off from, let's say, one of the gambling businesses out there?
What I'd like to see change. So again, lots of people that I know will have different opinions on this. My off the cuff opinion is that there's far too much advertising. There are people that advocate for all of advertising to be banned, and I can understand that. I'm not sure if I'm as extreme as that at this point in time, but I think that sport in particular is so diluted with gambling adverts that it's unhealthy, and I think there should be a dramatic shift in that, potentially with a gradual wind down to nothing, but it's far too much at the moment. And I'd like to see a different gambling act, basically more responsibility on the operators to prevent harm than there is at the moment. As things are, I don't think there's the regulation in place that can protect vulnerable people in the way that it needs to be done. Increased regulation, stronger regulator, less advertising. God, I could go on for a long while, but I'm not going to.
Yeah, you're exactly right, Andy. From my take on it, obviously you mentioned about when the iPhone was first released, the Gambling Act that we've got in place until recently was in 2005 that came out. So obviously that's before the advent of the iPhone and the smartphone. So it's not a policy that is up to date or an act that is up to date in terms of where people are gambling and how they're gambling. There is obviously change is happening, which is fantastic. It can never come quickly enough for people like us that work in the space that we do. But change is happening, and it'll be really interesting to see what that looks like in the near future. Gambling is now recognised as a public health issue, which is a huge step forward. In January this year, NICE guidelines, so the National Institute for Clinical Excellence, I think it is, guidelines were published around gambling. So there are great steps being taken. So in the healthcare sector now, medical professionals and care providers are required to start screening for gambling. All these things are really positive steps forward. And on the back of that, we use the public health line to encourage people to raise awareness in businesses. If healthcare providers are asking these questions, then employers, occupational health, HR and wellbeing, they can start asking those questions too. Yeah, as you say, same with Andy's story, where as he said, he didn't want it to all be doom and gloom. It's a story of hope, and with incredible journey that Andy's been on, and he's doing some outstanding work in this space now, sharing his story so candidly, openly, and regularly with people that he's doing amazing work. And it's the same, I think, in the gambling support space. There is amazing work already being done, and it's only going to get bigger and stronger the more organisations that we talk to, the more collaborations that we do, the more podcasts we appear on. It's heading in the right direction.
I think so. One of the things I think, Katie, is that it's really important to try and get different audiences. It's really important to try and engage with, like, a podcast like this one this evening, which you cover all sorts of stuff on your pod, Fish. It just so happens that this week we're talking about gambling, but you talk about a wide range of mental health situations and trying to help people to find their own way through difficult times. And I think that the gambling harm space really needs to spread that message far and wide. There's no point in all of us just talking to each other all the time about how bad things are. We need to get out there and talk to, whether it's construction, whether it's financial services, whether it's the legal profession you mentioned earlier, Kate, or whatever it might be. There's a whole world of people out there that they don't need to be scared off of gambling. They just need to be made aware of what the risks could be, and then let people make their own minds up. In theory, you can't legally gamble until you're 18, so let's let the adults make their own minds up about what they want to do as they go forward in life. But all we can do is to try and highlight the positives or the negatives that can come along with that, and then educate people in the right way.
Absolutely, because we want to educate people before they start gambling at harmful
Absolutely.
levels. Gambling is on a continuum, if you like. You can be gambling at the levels that Andy mentioned earlier on, where for some people, it is harmless fun, if you like. But if we educate them at that point as to what the risks are, what the potential harms, when they start to see their behaviours changing, then they're like, hang on a second, now I need to do something, because otherwise it's going to get to that harmful level. Again, core to that is education.
Yeah. Or as we said earlier, Kate, as well, or their family or friends will start to be curious about what's going on, and they might shut it down a little bit sooner than, if I go back to my own story, I kept that also secret, also quiet. I literally went home every day of the week for years to collect the post, to make sure that my partner didn't find the credit card bills that she didn't know about. I'm not saying, God, I'm saying this on a podcast. I'd never say any of it's her fault. It definitely isn't. But if we can educate partners and friends and family and parents to try and see some of these signs, then maybe we've just got a chance of saving one or two people from going down the same path that I went down, or a similar path. And you don't have to, my story's extreme. I mentioned earlier, it's like more than £1 million. Yeah, that's on the extreme level. But just so important is the person that's lost £1,000 or £500 or their £100 spare cash for the week that they were going to spend on a night out with a girlfriend, and whatever it might be, and they've done the money on the Saturday afternoon. They can't take the girlfriend out for a meal on the Saturday night. Relationship falls apart. Things go wrong. That person spirals into a descending sort of period of gambling that ends up being worse. So money to a certain extent is kind of irrelevant to it all. It's just money's the fuel that keeps it all going. But it doesn't matter if we're talking about 10 quid, 50 quid, 100 quid, or whatever. It's
relative, isn't it? Yeah,
makes no difference. And the other thing as well, which again I'm mentioning more, and we're probably going over time. I don't know, Vish, how we're doing for time, but
no, we're all good. We're all good.
The other thing that I'd always sort of try and reiterate as well, is it's just not all about money. This whole thing is not all about money. Again, if I pin back to my own personal story, do I regret losing all of my own personal funds that I had? Of course I do. Yeah. Do I regret descending into crime and stealing a fortune from a business that I'd worked at for a long, long while? Of course I do. But are there a whole load of family times and moments and situations and things that I look back on now and think, you know what, you weren't really there? Or there are really important moments in my life that I think back to, and all I can think about is I had £1,000 on like these football matches or whatever, and it came in or it lost or whatever it might have been, and I pin it all back to that. I pin those life-changing family events or life-changing personal events back to things that happened when I was gambling, and it's a constant reminder of the damage that was caused. Constant reminder. So it's not all about money at all. There's a whole mental health, well-being, relationships, career progression or lack of career progression. There's so many different consequences and impacts. I could go on about it forever. It's not just all about the fact that you've done all your money, you're in debt, and you've got to try and pay it off again. To a certain extent, that's the easy part.
I was just going to
trying to fix all of the other stuff. That's where the hard work comes in.
You can't make up for that lost time. We said earlier on, Vish, about whether we've heard stories like Andy's before. Yes, as Andy said, his is one of the more extreme stories that we talk about. But all of the people that I talk to will say the very similar sort of thing is that lost time, and that they're constantly now trying to make up for that lost time. But you can't get those old memories back. They're not coming back to you. So it's making up for that in the future moving forward. But say that, as Andy's very rightly said, that it's easy to just put gambling harms down to the financial impact. It is so much more than that.
And when the press cover stories, like as an example, again, my story, when the press covered that, they drill down on the monetary side of it. They don't drill down on the other aspects of it. And one of the things, and I know you mentioned it right at the start of the pod earlier, Katie. One of the things that we always forget about is the damage that's done to other people. Did I damage myself? Of course I did. I went to prison. That's causing me a whole lot of harm. I lost a really good job. I went to prison. Didn't really know how life was going to work forward from that. Forget about me for a minute. Did I cause damage to a whole load of other people? 100%. A whole load of people that I worked with, people that I worked with for years that I was friends with. Yeah, I've no idea the impact that my gambling had on them and the behaviour that I went through had on them. But I can't imagine it was particularly good. The impact I had on my partner, I know, was devastating. The impact on my parents, who are now in their 80s, again, devastating. The impact on my kids, luckily, they're quite resilient. Youngsters are resilient, and I think that they've somehow or another they've worked through it. Impact on friends, wider family. The list is endless, and a lot of the time people forget about all of those other people that have been affected by it. And they're generally the people that, as I said earlier, I've gone through a whole process of trying to get support and trying to rebuild and trying to create this sort of mantra that this is how I'm going to live my life going forward. These are the things that I'm going to do. And if I carry on doing these things, then I won't go back to doing the stuff that was harmful. Because I'm in that recovery space and that sort of world, I'm zoned into that. That's what I want to do. The affected other side of the equation, they probably don't want to do it. All they really want to do is forget about the whole thing that happened. When again, going a little bit deeper than I normally do, when my partner tried to get a little bit of support, I spoke to her from the prison on the prison phone about how are the sessions going that she was having with the support service. And she said, you know what, when I come off the phone, I feel worse than I did when I went on. And in the end, she stopped it. She decided to not go ahead because she felt it was doing her more harm than good. Now, it might be right to say that if she had carried on with that, maybe it would have borne through eventually, and maybe things would have worked out. But for wives, partners, parents, whatever, the challenge is monumentally more than it is for the actual gambler. Because when it all comes out, we just shrug our shoulders and say, yeah, well, I didn't tell you about it, but I've told you now, and now I'm going to try and fix myself. And then you leave all of this carnage behind you. They're picking up the hand grenades and trying to pull the pins out or put the pins back in, should I say? So we always forget about people like that, and they, in very much in very much a way they're the people we should be thinking about and amongst it all as well. And the same as when we're going through some of the behaviour, we need to be thinking about the impact that might be having on family or kids or whatever. If I do this on a Saturday afternoon, what's it going to mean to my Sunday with the family?
Well, it's an interesting statistic I've got here, which says 20% of people are indirectly affected by gambling. And I think that's the 20% you're speaking about. But I know we're coming up to, well, we're a little bit over the podcast, but that's fine. But I would love to know if, Katie, you have any final words of wisdom to share. Is there any awareness programs you guys have got running? Is there any other charities that can help out with this situation? I'd love to know your final thoughts on this.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Bet No More UK, obviously, we have an amazing range of support services in the first place. We have our Peer Aid flagship peer support service, which is absolutely fantastic. And we've got this amazing model where people that we provide peer-to-peer support to, once they're in a stable place in their own recovery, they can come back to us to complete a qualification. It doesn't cost them anything. They go through our own program. They then become qualified peer supporters themselves. They can then volunteer their time to go and help more people through their journey of recovery. So we've got this fantastic model that's already enabled some people to volunteer for us, but some people even end up working for us as employees as well. So that, that issue with finding employment for people out of when they're sort of in a safe space in their recovery, we do whatever we can to help people along that path as well. Recognising that more and more women are gambling. New Beginnings is our women-only service that was established a few years ago based on, a Frankie's initiative in conjunction with one of our peers, Lisa. Recognising that for her, when walking into a Gamblers Anonymous meeting wasn't necessarily the right environment for her. So she wanted a support service for women delivered by women. And of course, as with our services, that also works for affected others as well. And we do some great work through our goals team, community outreach, just going out there, having brief interventions with members of the public in different community settings. So that's all the sort of support services from Bet No More. But we're also part of the National Gambling Support Network, the NGSN, a bunch of charities across the UK doing some amazing work in different regions. So we know that if, for example, people come to us for support, then we can triage them. And if the support services that we provide aren't right for their specific needs, then we can signpost them to the members of the NGSM where they are getting the right kind of service, so including residential rehab and so on. Training-wise, we have an amazing programme called WorkSafe, as I've talked about at the beginning, where we go out to organisations and we provide them with the training. We've got CPD training that can be delivered in person, online. Takes 2 hours of your time. We've also got an extended version of that where we can actually talk to someone like Andy in the room and have a Q&A with them whilst also experiencing that learning. So there's lots of different options available. We're developing our e-learning program at the moment, which is going to be really exciting. We've also done some brilliant recording recently of some lived experience sessions where people, our network of experts by experience, as we affectionately call them, they've shared some of their snippets of their stories, which are going to be, we've recorded them, we're going to edit them down that we can then promote and share with other people as well. So there's lots of amazing work that we're doing here, but also collaboratively as part of the NGSN.
Wow. Thank you so much, Katie. And I want to end with Andy. So same question to you, if that's okay.
Katie went into so much detail there that I'm not even sure what the question was, but I'll give you my version of what I think the question was, at least, if I can.
Cool.
So what do I think is most important? What do I think should happen? What do I think people should be doing? So for anyone listening that is in any stage of a journey through gambling, and maybe reflecting on what I've said tonight in particular and thinking, you know what, I could end up in a bad way here, end up in a bad situation. What I would want to do is to encourage them to try and seek some support from all of the places where Katie has just mentioned. Pick up the phone, call the National Gambling Helpline, have a chat with them. That is the first thing that I did in my journey of trying to get better, and had a very non-judgmental conversation with a lady on the phone. She understood what was going on because she speaks to people every single day about the same thing. She got it. I thought it was going to be an impossible discussion, but it was fine. So encouraging people to reach out for support is it's massive. I've talked quite a lot about some of the bad stuff that happened, and I've hopefully talked a fair bit about some of the good stuff that's happened since. None of that good stuff that's happened to me since would have happened had I not picked up the phone and reached out for some help. Where I would have ended up, how that would have, what the end of that story or the end of that podcast would have been, I do not know, but it definitely wouldn't have been as good as this one. So, pick up the phone, talk to a friend. If you've got a friend that you're worried about, have a chat with them. Going back to the whole point of this podcast, I suppose, Vish, talking to people, opening up that conversation, having some connection, having a chat over a coffee, whatever it might be. Sometimes it might be, you know what, you don't quite see yourself at the minute. How's things going? What's going on in the world for you? Don't ask someone if they're fine, because they're just going to say yeah. But just try and get a little bit of a discussion going on, a little bit of a curious conversation that might then lead to, well, yeah, I had a bad weekend because I've done all my money on the football and I couldn't go out Saturday night and I was really fed up, whatever it might be. But just have those sort of little chats and, yeah, just encouraging people to try and search out and seek whatever support they think they might need. And like I say, I don't know if that answers the question you asked me, but that was what I wanted to say at the end. So
thank you so much, Katie. Thank you so much, Andy. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to like, share and subscribe to the channel. Honestly, the more people we reach, the more support we can offer. And don't forget, Onward Shift isn't just a podcast. We've got a number of resources on our website, so please don't forget to check out www.onwardshift.com, where you'll find counsellors, keynote speakers, coaches, blogs and so much more. Until next time, don't forget to keep having these important conversations.